From the heartland of America, focused on God, family, and country, the mouthpiece of the Midwest. This is Dale Carter's America.
Special guest joining us. He's from the Jackson County Legislature, Sean Smith, who's been a guest on this podcast before, but we welcome you back in kind of a different role today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You've decided to go from one unpopular organization to another unpopular organization.
I am a glutton for punishment. If it's going to help people out, I'm willing to do it.
All right. You're on the Jackson County Legislature, and now you're going to run for the 5th District congressional seat that is currently and for a very long time been held by Emanuel Cleaver.
He has been there a long time. It's 18 years, and if he gets elected again, it'll be 20. He's been 40 years on the public dime as an elected official. So
well, he's going for the Joe Biden statue.
That's a long time.
Yeah. People, if you ask them, they hate Congress, but they love their congressman. And that's why once you get to be an incumbent, it's like easy to get reelected. And in the 5th District, for as long as I can remember, that's been a Democrat stronghold.
Yeah. If history is correct, I think it's 100 years that we've had an elected Democrat in the general Jackson County area.
Yeah. Well, you come to us on the podcast. Gosh, it's too bad there's nothing going on news-wise this week.
Yeah.
So before we dig into the details on your race in the 5th District and all of that, what are your thoughts on what happened over the weekend with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's absolutely despicable. The person that perpetrated it is gone, and that doesn't make me sad at all. Looks like, the Secret Service and local law enforcement maybe could have done a better job, but information's coming out, and I'm not condemning anybody until we have all the facts and information. That's how I tend to roll. And I really hope that they'll be very transparent about that, not go behind closed doors to gather information, hopefully do it right out in full view of the public, because we have a huge trust problem in the United States these days. And the only way to resolve that I know of is honest and open and transparent dialogue and information exchange.
Politics are so toxic right now, and we are a divided nation. But I thought the president said it well. I wish he practiced what he preached, but I think he said it well that just because we're on opposite sides of things and see things in a different way doesn't mean that we're enemies.
Absolutely correct. And that's how I've functioned as a legislator in the short time that I've been a legislator, about a year and a half now. I get along. I serve in a capacity where there are 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And yet I feel like I've been able to accomplish some things. And part of that is because I focus on things that do need to change and that most people agree need to change. And it's been because I don't throw stones at the individuals. I see... And it's not just party lines. Even amongst my Democratic colleagues on the legislature, if they're angry at each other, it's hard for them to be productive in a way that they might otherwise agree. So that's been kind of how I've functioned in my life for a long time, is to try to be respectful to people and focus on the problems, and then really focus on the problems that we both agree, we want to solve.
Right. Well, Jacob Turk ran in that slot that you're running in forever. I mean, it was like he drew the short straw or whatever. Maybe he enjoyed running. I don't know what the deal was, but he came back time after time after time, and he always lost badly. Ryan Dirks did it. I'm not sure if Jacob came back and ran again last time.
Yeah, one more time after Ryan.
Yeah, you're not opposed by anybody on the primary side, so it's just you. So what do you as a Republican bring to this thing that's going to be different than Jacob brought or Ryan brought?
Yeah, and I will say those are both fine guys. They are, I would consider them friends, not in the close everyday chatting or drinking a beer kind of way, but certainly I would consider them friends. What I've realized as a legislator, as an elected official, I get invited to things and have connections that there's no way either of them would have as a first-timer. That's an example. I was invited to the Juneteenth parade as a Jackson County legislator. They didn't allow candidates, but as a sitting official, they allowed me to be in the parade. I wasn't sure what the reception would be like in that particular area. It was great because I've served people with this property tax debacle, and they know it. I was passing out candy to people on the streets, and they were thanking me for my service. And so that's just a very different advantage. The other is media access. They say all all media is good media, right? So there's this little controversy that has my name in it, even though I haven't done anything wrong, I haven't been accused of doing anything wrong related to the property tax trial and Andrew Bailey. I mean, my name is out there because I'm fighting for people on a regular basis in a way that it wouldn't be if I wasn't a county legislator. I didn't start at that level thinking that was going to be any kind of stepping stone. That was not my intent. I ran, I'm serving, I will continue to serve as long as possible in that role. And then the reality is that I looked around and didn't see anybody else who could do better at contesting the election against Cleaver. And I think it's important. We always have competitive elections.
Well, and this one will be a competitive election. The 5th District is somewhat interesting because it encompasses Kansas City, the city, and then it kind of meanders its way out east. It's gerrymandered a little bit, perhaps. I don't know. But the demographics are it's 60% white, but it's 22% black. And if you can make any inroads in the black community, I think you've got a really good chance of unseating Cleaver at this point. So you mentioned going to the Juneteenth parade and all that. Are you talking to black people and what their view of the world is and how we as Republicans can address that?
I do. As a matter of fact, at that parade, we had a person with me that had my shirt on that said Jackson County Legislator, Sean Smith. And we just stopped at the Dollar General right there by the parade to grab a cool drink before we got underway. Guy says, who's that? Because my girlfriend was wearing the shirt, and she said, that's him. And he started talking to me. He's a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. He's a Trump voter. We shouldn't paint each other with a picture that broadly says, people that look like this or are going to necessarily support one candidate or the other. I see everybody as an individual as much as I can, and don't get caught up into the kind of political arena of dividing people into categories. That's
I agree
not
with
helpful.
you. We shouldn't do that. But historically, 90% of the black population votes for Democrats, to the point where Democrats just take it for granted that they're going to get that vote, which is why I've said many times on this podcast, we need to have that conversation. How do you see the world differently than we see the world, and how can we help?
Yeah.
How can we be of service to you?
Yep. And I do have those kinds of conversations with people. I was at a career day at University Academy. It's a charter school in the Kansas City district that is a really high percentage African American. I would guess 95%. I don't know the exact number, but spending time even with the kids there to talk about how they see the world. It's people that live in the city, whether they're white or black, have a different view of people and a different view of the world than folks that live in a suburban community like myself. And that's different than people that live in a rural community. I think the race division is certainly one of them. It's a way that's statistically interesting. I look at it and approach it and say, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Do you like the trajectory you've been on in the last 20 years? The trajectory we've been on as a community for the last 20 years while my opponent's been in elected office. Is he getting the job done for you? And if he's not, are you willing to give it a shot to try somebody else, somebody with a different set of principles and philosophies maybe than he has, and see what happens. And I respect their opinion, whether they vote for me or not.
The oversimplification of Democrat versus Republican is Democrats, it seems to me, want to take as much money from us as they can, run it through the spin cycle in Washington, D.C., and then ferret it out. I think that's what Joe Biden means when he says build the economy from the ground up and the middle out. I mean, that's the only way I can think of it, because I've never worked for a poor person. Have you?
I have not worked for a poor person. I've worked for actually a really wealthy person for the last 25 years.
So that's who we work for. So if you're going to build it from the ground up and the sides out, or whatever he says on that, it's got to be more money to D.C. Yet I'm going to give you some other stats. We have taken in, because of the Trump tax cuts, whenever you cut taxes, you get more money into the Treasury. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, rate cuts tend to drive actually more growth, which then results in more actual revenue total.
So we currently are pulling in $5 trillion a year in revenue from people like you and me and Kurt and everybody else who pays taxes. The problem is the deficit now is $2 trillion and the debt is $35 trillion. And we're adding $1 trillion every 100 days to the debt. So whoever wins this election, whether it's you or Cleaver, Trump or Biden, they're going to inherit a mess.
Absolutely.
How do we get out of it?
I won't claim to have all those answers. I will say that I will say one thing that distinguishes me is I see Democrat versus Republican. You mentioned from a tax standpoint and finance standpoint. My experience with Republicans is they all want to think very, very independently. They want to be independent in how they live their lives, self-sufficient, all that kind of stuff. And folks who maybe are more community focused, who want to be part of this collective, tend to lean more Democrat. But the bottom line is we need some adults in the room. It's a phrase that I've coined regarding the property tax assessment debacle, is when you don't have adults in the room, then you do things like this. Kids, you give them a quarter, they spend a quarter, and they try to spend $1 if they could, right? If they had a credit card. Adults know that they can't spend more than they make. And that's not who we've had in congressional leadership for a while now, I suppose. We need leaders who are really focused on fiscal responsibility. The specifics, I spend so much time on county stuff. I'm not digging into the federal budget. I'm not saying I'm walking in with solutions. I'm saying I have the spirit of somebody who wants to fix things. That's a demonstrated history that people can now look at. I'm not going to change that when I go to Washington. My job when I get there is going to be to learn and figure it out and start to move things in the right direction. And with being a member of a body that's 435 people,
right,
where you're one of 435, navigating that, figuring out what the ideas are that are going to catch traction and actually make some progress, it's almost unfathomably complex. But the reality is that you need somebody that's smart and motivated to get in there and do it, and I'm that person.
You're offering that, and we appreciate you running for Congress. You mentioned being independent-minded, and it just reminded me of something that happened last week and why I know where I am on the spectrum as far as politics go. We had a project done at our house, right? And he got it done early. So I had a little cash flow crunch because, like smart people, I put a lot of my money into a money market that's generating 5% right now.
Yep.
But it takes 24 hours to get the money. So I called Edward Jones, and my guy was busy, so they sent me to somebody in St. Louis. And when we figured out what we were going to need, they said, now we're going to need to know what you need this money for. I'm like, you're kidding me, right?
Right.
It's my money. What are we doing here? And apparently somewhere along the line, they've passed a law that a fiduciary has to ask you. It's a protection mechanism because elderly people get scammed.
Right.
So there we are. I'm the independent guy, and you're going to ask me what I want the money for. And I would tell you this, too. I went back to Indiana to see my grandkids this weekend, and I got gas in Columbia. And then when I stopped in St. Louis, because I have a small gas tank on my car, it declined my credit card. And when you call the bank, they're like, well, we didn't know you were going. Well, yeah. Do I need to call you and tell you? I mean, that's the nanny state that we have created through regulation and all that, and I think it's stifling business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll offer another example where as government grows and tries to, gain more and more control and visibility into what we do, part of, I believe it was the Inflation Reduction Act, mandated that payment processors like Venmo and PayPal start to disclose any transactions you do that could cumulatively be between one person and another over $600. That's me going to dinner with friends,
right,
and it's each Venmoing each other $25. And if we go to dinner and split bills, let's just say a dozen times in a year, suddenly I'm hitting potentially that limit. That's crazy. And then the question is, how did they know the difference between a personal transaction and a business transaction, and where in a tax form is there? It was an insurmountable amount of penetration into our privacy that should not have been allowed. We need to get in there and repeal that. And they have, by the way, the IRS has deferred implementing that rule for a second year in a row now. We don't need the IRS in our back pocket. One thing that I'm advocating for is to allow cash tips when you go to a restaurant and tip or whatever to not be reportable as income. What happens today is that estimates get made based on the total bills that a server has, and they're paying potentially income tax on money they didn't even get. I'm saying let's take a little bit of our privacy back. Let's put a little bit more money in these people that are workers' pockets by letting them keep that portion that people choose to tip tax-free. I think that is a step in the right direction in terms of kind of putting the thumb on the scale toward more privacy, not less, and toward helping folks that are working class folks.
Trump raised that when he was out in Nevada. That was one of the things that he brought up as well. I've said this before. I had Chris Matthews on my show on KFKF, and I think he just blew off the question because he and I don't see eye to eye, but I respect him. And I said, back when we were kids, we all had the coolest stereo you could imagine. And if you looked behind that stereo, all the wires, because this wire went here, this wire went here.
I still have that.
That's what our government is. It's on steroids. We have an 80,000-page tax code. You've got to be a CPA if you have any complexity at all to your life. You got to have a CPA to navigate all that. And I told Chris Matthews, I think we just need to reboot the whole thing. Pull the plug out and plug it back in again and start over with, what the government ought to pay for and how we should pay for it.
Yeah. We need a significant transformation in terms of how large the government is. I was in a social media exchange with somebody, and I'm generally in favor of term limits for congresspeople. And somebody said, well, people can just vote them out. And I said, absolutely, they can. But the incumbency advantage from a monetary perspective,
right,
having so much money in politics, and that money leans toward incumbents because they're most likely to win. That's a tremendous challenge in my campaign. People can donate at SeanSmithForMo.com, by the way. The reality is that I'm running on a shoestring budget that's mostly my own money, while my opponent's sitting on several $1 million that he's amassed in a war chest. And we just really need to think about the complexity. And the complexity in government isn't just about the federal government. When we think of our city, school district, county, state, very few people, I would hazard a guess and say less than 1 in 5 people can name all the elected officials that are currently representing them. That's a hard day. And then when you think of money being in politics, well, that's the only way to break through to people and get your name out there. Yeah. So it's a real frustrating challenge, but the reality is up and down the spectrums of government, we need to simplify.
Well, the good news for you is I think the National Democrats look at the 5th as an easy win for the Democrats, so they're not going to flood it with a lot of money. So you can run this insurgent campaign and maybe come out with a win.
Yeah, and I do have a tremendous number of volunteers. That's super helpful. Give you an idea, we're dropping literature on people's doors right now that maybe would normally be a mailer. Well, I have so many volunteers that we can get that out there with just the printing cost instead of the mail cost. And look what's happened to prices, including postage prices lately. We're talking about a first-class stamp pretty soon is going to be 75 cents. 22 cents just, 10 years ago.
Exactly.
It is crazy what has happened to the cost of goods and costs of services that we just rely on. And we just have to, as an insurgent campaign, I am hopeful. We saw what happened with the stadium vote. That was a lot of money against a very small amount of money.
Exactly.
And the small amount of money and a lot of passion, a lot of good information, a lot of dissemination of information prevailed. Now, was that the right answer for the community? I think time will tell. But the reality is that we do see small campaigns. Before that tax, there was a use tax on the ballot.
And it lost too.
I think I was one of the only people that was out really spending any money, and I only spent a couple $1,000s of my own money to kind of advocate against that, and it lost resoundingly.
Right. Well, we've tried to get out of the county, set up our own county. You were part of that deal too, and I'm not giving up on that dream either. And until we can get there, we're just going to keep voting no on any funding mechanism for Jackson County until they kick us out.
Yeah, and that's one strategy. I will say I have a strategy that I'm pursuing that's a little different to try to course correct the county. The reality is, though, that if we separate, we're still neighbors. And if one neighbor's lawn is looking bad and their house is getting dilapidated and they're inviting the wrong kind of people over to the neighborhood, it's going to impact you. Well, so I believe we really do have to fix it would be better than separating, but in the absence of ability to fix it, then separating becomes the only option.
For the reason that you are here, the 5th district is composed of Kansas City. That's the biggest chunk in it. I am not in the 5th district. I was in the 6th district. I haven't moved at all. I was in the 6th district for the first 20 years I owned my house, and then they traded me to the 4th. So I'm a Mark Alford guy. He's a dear friend of mine anyway. Yep. So other than Kansas City, what are the big towns in the 5th district?
Yeah, you've got Lee Summit, you've got Independence, north you've got Gladstone.
You get some of Blue Springs, because I think there are 3 congressional districts in Blue Springs.
Correct. Blue Springs is kind of split when you're talking about the portion of it that's south of I-70. Anything east of 7 Highway is going to be, I believe, Alford, and anything west of there is going to be the 5th district. So I'm getting a lot of help out of Blue Springs, Lee Summit. But yeah, the reality is that
maybe I've been traded again because I'm west of 7 Highway.
If you're west of 7 Highway and south of 70,
I'm north of 70.
yeah, so up there, the reason I split that hair is because there the borderline gets a little bit more detailed.
Yeah.
I suspect you know what district you're in. But yeah, so I just kind of generally guidance of thinking of I-70 and 7 Highway as being kind of a corner, and then it gets a little bit of a swervy line to decide who's who.
All right. Well, I was going to ask you to get your website out there, but Kurt's already done that. You mentioned it as well. So if you can vote for Sean Smith for Congress, let's get Cleaver out of there. It's time to retire his number.
I appreciate that. And I will say that on the website, there's an opportunity for people to sign up and help however they can, little check boxes. If they check the box that says they want to work at a poll, if they check a box that says they'll canvass in their neighborhood or put a yard sign out, or even just be what we call a social media ambassador. So amplifying stuff on social media is a great way to get it out there and put my message and the important messages that we're trying to convey to people into communities that maybe are not places that I have direct access to. So everybody has friends that I don't know, and I'm happy to have my content out there shared. That's a really important aspect of this campaign.
All right. Well, best of luck to you. And if you win, we want you to come back. And even if you don't win, you're still going to be a legislator, so we'll probably want you to come back too.
I love it, and I will say I'm happy to come back anytime. And I know I'm going to win in August because I am uncontested.
Way to go. Sean, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Dale.
The views expressed on Dale Carter's America are Dale's and Kurt Wheeler's. They do not necessarily reflect the views of KFKF or Steel City Media. Comments can be sent to dalecartersamerica@gmail.com. Check back for weekly episodes. Subscribe, spread the word, and give us a 5-star review. Thanks for being a part of Dale Carter's America.